Welcome to another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I am the founder of Teach the Geek. I work with technical professionals so they can present more effectively, especially in front of non-technical audiences. And you can learn more about that at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Today, my guest is Dr. Lori McDowell. She is the CEO of Reimaging U Strategies, providing coaching, speaking, and training services. I heard her speak on another podcast, so I was really keen to have her on mine. And I really want to learn more about how a PhD in chemical engineering ended up being a coach. And I'm really also interested in learning more about her time in corporate America, particularly how being an effective communicator benefited her. So, welcome to Teach the Geek interviews, Dr. Lori.
Hi, Neil. Glad to be here.
So, as I mentioned, you studied chemical engineering. So, what was the motivation to study that?
When I was in high school, I was really good at math. I liked chemistry, and I saw that chemical engineers made a lot of money. I had no idea what a chemical engineer did, but I said, I was the first in my family to go to college. So I was like, well, chemical engineering sounds good. I guess I'll be a chemical engineer.
It's not all that dissimilar from why I became an engineer. And I used to lie about it because I was a bit embarrassed by the reason. Because whenever I would hear why other people became engineers, it always sounded like a much better reason. Maybe they played with Legos when they were a kid, or they were that kid that took apart the toaster and put it back together, or maybe they were in a robotics club. I don't even remember playing with Legos all that much, and I certainly didn't try taking apart the toaster. My mother wouldn't have been too happy about that. And
No.
and there was no robotics club at my high school. I became an engineer because my father said I should, and
Ah,
I didn't really think about anything else. I didn't have any other plans, so engineering it was.
yeah. Yeah. Sometimes we just, figure it sounds good.
Yeah,
Chemistry was fun, math was easy, so it made sense.
you know what? For me, math wasn't even all that easy. I wasn't even that big a fan of chemistry, but I wasn't engineering, so go figure. But I also saw that you got a master's in environmental engineering. So what was the motivation to do that?
When I graduated with my undergraduate, I actually I mean I always felt I was your typical college student, save the world. And my first job was actually for an environmental consulting firm, and I really loved what I was doing. Except all the best projects went to people with master's degrees. So I was like, well, I'll get a master's degree. And I got it in environmental engineering. And then when I decided I was going to go on for my PhD, I looked at environmental engineering, and back then I just felt like it was such a new field that to be a PhD, it didn't really have the background. So I switched back to chemical engineering. But even in my PhD, like my thesis had a environmental bend to it. So it was kind of still stayed with that environmental area.
All right. So yeah, you did mention that you ended up going for the PhD. So what was the motivation to even go past the master's and get a PhD?
Um, I liked research. I liked what I was learning in grad school. So it was really just seemed like be a good idea to get it. It opened up, I thought maybe if I wanted to teach in a university, that opened up those opportunities. Um, and it just sounded like a good idea at the time.
Okay. So now you finished, you got a bachelor's, you got a master's, you got a PhD. What type of work did you do once you finished all that school?
When I finished all that school, I actually got a job in a research and development for a company that made catalysts. So I worked in a research and development department I did that for about 7 years. And it was interesting. That's kind of where I started. Well, I started speaking because I was most of the research people didn't like to be, or, they're very quiet. They're really very studious. And even though I was great at the research, I liked people. So when the salespeople needed someone to talk to customers about research, they always invited me out to talk to all the customers. So that was really where I started doing a lot of presentations.
Okay. When you're talking, Dr. Lori, reminded me of a conference that I went to not too long ago last summer. And it was a technical conference, mostly engineers in the audience. And there was a business development person who gave a presentation, but after the presentation, he got a whole lot of technical questions that he couldn't answer. And luckily, there were two engineers from his company in the audience, and they answered the questions from their seats. The room was small enough that we could actually hear them, since obviously they weren't at the front of the room. Made me wonder, why didn't one of them give the presentation in the first place? So it sounds like you could have been that engineer that would have been comfortable giving that presentation.
Right. Yeah, I was the person who could have given that presentation because I enjoyed it. And I mean, I definitely, at first I was nervous, but I definitely got better at it the more I did it. So
Yeah. So you started off in one part of the business. Did you move around to other parts? And if so, what were the motivations to do that?
yeah, I did. As I started being brought in front of customers to talk about the technology, I actually really liked the customer interaction. So I ended up moving into a technical support role from research and development. And even from that, I moved into sales and eventually into business development. So I spent, a good part of my career in technical sales and business development, where I was talking to the customers and giving the talks at conferences, but also I still had the technical. So I was kind of the connection between the technical part and the actual sales.
What did you notice when you started in those technical sales roles about sales that you didn't know before you started those types of roles?
I think what I really learned, you always have this idea that salespeople, because you deal with car salesmen and various different types of salesperson. And I didn't know how much it really had very little to do with the sales and a lot to do with relationships. I mean, it was really, if you developed a good relationship with people, if you actually got to the fact where you were comfortable and you liked and you trusted them. I mean, they always say no, like, and trust. But when that relationship was great, then sales was really easy because they wanted to buy from you because they liked you and you wanted to help them. So it was much more relationship building than it was actual sales.
How did you go about building relationships?
Just really getting to know people. Did a lot of, just spending time with them, having meetings, taking them out to dinner or lunch, and just really trying to get to know people as people, finding out what they liked outside of work and finding out, the quirks of everyone's personality, who liked this, who was quiet, who, just really, I think the more time you spend following up, a lot of times people might think, okay, I'm selling something, it's automatic. If there's no problem, I won't, I'll contact them when there's an issue. But you get to know people by having regular contact and contact in different ways. So
The moves that you made in your work life, were these moves that you wanted or planned to make, or were these moves that others asked you to make?
they were moves that I can't say I planned to make them, when I started my career, but they were moves that I decided I wanted to make. Sometimes it took me a little longer or I had to go about it. Like when I moved into sales, I wasn't planning to move from Maryland to Houston, yet that was the way I had to go. So I did that. I took the move to Houston because the opportunity was there a lot quicker than if I stayed where I was. But in general, they were moves that I decided I wanted to make, and I just looked for ways to do them.
Okay, yeah, that does sound to be the way I hear most people making those types of moves. Did you ever work as a manager of people?
I did. When I was in research, I had a team under me. And then in the sales group, I was an indirect manager of people. So I wasn't, I didn't have my own team in any of the roles, but I had people where their teams kind of worked for me indirectly. So,
What's one thing that you noticed about managing people that you didn't anticipate before you actually started doing it?
it was very similar, to the sales thing in that the relationship part was really important. And when trying to see things from other people's eyes, managing is a lot more about, a lot less about like being the boss, I found, than it is about building those relationships and having everybody, the whole team kind of know what the goal and what the outcome is. And once you get everybody to buy in, then everybody's willing to do it. And you almost don't have to do much managing per se, because people are really, they're all working towards a common goal.
Do you think that managers should have a leadership style, or should they manage or lead based on the way others want to be led?
I think it's a lot of, I mean, it's probably a combination, but definitely knowing the way others want to be led and adapting it for them. Because it's hard, I think it's important not to treat everybody exactly the same. As far as, if some people need a lot of direction and other people are very self-starters. And if you treat them both exactly the same, one of them, either they're both going to be unhappy or one of them is going to be unhappy. So I think seeing how, it's kind of a combination because everyone does have their own innate style and it's hard to completely change that, but you do need to see how others want to be led. And, if you're leading a team of people who are very self-starters and self-motivated and you try to micromanage them, it's just not going to work. However, some people need to be micromanaged. And if you have those kind of people, you might need to do that. So
I'm always curious to ask people who have led others about vulnerability in leadership. Well, I often hear how important it is. Well, when you hear vulnerability in leadership, what does that mean to you? And is it as important as others say it is?
yeah, I think it's really important. And I think what vulnerability in leadership means is, even though you're the leader, you don't have all the answers, and you're open to admitting that you don't have all the answers, and letting someone, that is on your team take the lead on specific problems, or have the, when they know more than you do, you need to acknowledge that and allow them to get that authority. Because, a good leader doesn't know everything. A good leader knows how to get things done and how to find things. And it's not, they don't, they know how to delegate, they know how to get the best out of people. And sometimes, by being vulnerable and admitting that you need people's help, you really do get the best out of them.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And I often talk about how technical people sometimes have an issue saying that they don't know because they assume that others look to them for answers. So if that's the case and they say they don't know, then perhaps those people won't look to them for answers anymore. They think that maybe they're not as good as their job, maybe that they're not as good at their job. But obviously, I think we all recognize, at least theoretically, that it's impossible to know everything. But so it really becomes more, well, you're a human being if you actually admit you don't know, and then you think this person has the answer to everything. Are they lying to me sometimes?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. One of the biggest things I learned in doing my PhD work was, like, my PhD didn't it. Yeah, I learned a lot on my specific thesis, but the most important thing I learned was really how to learn, and the fact that you don't know everything. You could learn it, but you don't know it, and you're never going to know it all. You just have to be open to learning from other people, and that's really what I learned from doing a PhD thesis, is that you can't possibly know everything, but it taught you how to learn what you needed.
For those who are listening or watching our conversation and they would like to become leaders at some point, what are some traits that they should start working on now?
One of the things I think as a leader is, I mean, self-confidence is really important, and not self-confidence in an arrogant part of way, but self-confidence in that you're comfortable being yourself. You're comfortable with who you are, and you know that you have things you're not good at, you have things that you're good at, and you're comfortable with that. Because I think a leader who is confident in who they are, it doesn't matter what they know, but they're confident in who they are, and that builds trust against people. So working on, being comfortable and really loving who you are is really important. I think teamwork and realizing, motivating people and learning how to deal with people's individual styles is really important. Just learning teamwork, learning to delegate, learning that, management, like the leadership, is not about being the boss. It's about getting the best out of everybody. And you do that by developing relationships. And I think communication is really important for a leader. So start working on your communication skills, particularly listening. Listening is much more valuable than talking.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, especially the communications part, which leads me really nicely to this next question. So, when I first started this podcast and YouTube channel, it had to do with my own struggles working as an engineer and having to give presentations in front of management and not being all that great at it at first. But I saw the benefit of getting better at it, so I did that. So I'm curious with you, Dr. Lori, is speaking in front of others, communicating what you know, something you've always been good at? And if not, what'd you do to get better at it?
I've always been fairly comfortable. So I've never been the person who, like, doesn't want to be in front of people. So I've always been comfortable. I haven't always been good. And I think that, when you're giving presentations, a couple things. One, you need to be confident you know what you're talking about. So know the material. You don't have to know everything, but at least you do have to be an expert in the area. And what someone once told me this, when I was giving my PhD, is you have to realize that you are the expert, and that you do know probably more on this topic than everyone in the audience. So feel comfortable giving the presentation. But then the other things I had to work on were, just the presenting skills, looking at people, making eye contact with people, how you talk about stuff, making it simple enough that people can get it, yet not so simple, that it sounds like you're not talking about anything. And then practicing. I mean, you do have to practice. When I give a talk, you want to practice it first till you know it perfectly, but then you want to practice it until it sounds like it's so natural that you're giving it without having like practiced it. So it's kind of interesting. You want to practice it to the point where it sounds like you're not practicing anymore. Because if you just practice to the point where you know perfectly, then you're really stiff and you're not comfortable and it sounds like you're reading it. So you want to, once you know it to that point, you want to go beyond it to the point where you're comfortable with it.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. No one wants to hear a robot speak. Although with AI advancing as fast as it is, who knows? We might be closer to that than we may think. A question I forgot to ask, but I'm really curious to the answer to. I mean, I mentioned in the intro that you eventually, you're a person that has this PhD in chemical engineering. You ended up becoming a coach. So, what was the motivation to start Reimagine U Strategies?
Yeah, it wasn't necessarily the most positive motivation. I was in a job and I was fired from that job. And I was fired in a rather a horrible way. I was fired after driving to 4 hours to a 2-day meeting where I was supposed to speak. And when I got there, I found out my hotel room had been canceled and they fired me and told me to go home. And it was kind of a devastating experience because this was a job that until recently I had loved. And then a boss retired, a new person came in, and the job changed. And I thought I would retire from that job. I was about 4 or 5 years from retirement, and I had no plans to leave. And I guess at that point, I decided, on that long drive home, I decided I didn't want another job because I felt like when I had a job, I had a job that I loved, and then suddenly in an instant, I didn't love it. I really disliked it. And then suddenly I'm being fired. I felt like, people have jobs because they feel like they're security, but I was depending on someone else for my security, and I didn't want to do that anymore. So I didn't know what I was going to do. I had a little bit of savings while I figured it out, and I always wanted to write a book. I never had time. So now that I had time, I wrote a book. And in writing that book, I realized I like training, I like teaching people. I had always done that as part of my corporate work. So now I decided to become a coach and to help people, find joy and fulfillment in their life, find out what their true purpose was, and live their best life. So it was came from a negative place, but I'm actually really grateful because I feel like that was the best thing that happened for me at that time. And had it not been such an awful experience, I probably would have just got another job. But it was such a devastating experience that it allowed me to rethink my whole life and change it.
Wow. 4 hour drive. Like, damn, they couldn't have told you before you got on the road.
I know. I still find that crazy. I think
Oh,
they wanted to make an example. Like I was one of the top performers in the company. I was the face of the company at conferences. Everyone knew me. And I think they wanted to make it clear that, this is the way we're doing things. And if you disagree, we're going to fire you. And if we fire Lori, then we'll fire anybody. So,
oh, okay. So, okay, you were kind of the sacrificial lamb, perhaps. Everyone,
mhm.
everyone else got in line and thought, man,
Yes.
if I make a four
That's
hour
the only
drive,
thing I could think of. I don't know why else they wouldn't have fired me 4 hours before I left my house.
yeah, man, everybody else was probably thinking, if I make a 4 hour drive, I hope that the hotel room is still there when I get there.
Yeah.
Damn, that's crazy. Wow, I'm sorry you had to go through that. But you mentioned your book. What's your book about, and what do you hope people get from it?
Yeah, the book is called The Reinvention Mindset. And what I did was, after this happened to me, I realized that the people that really inspired me were the people who had bad things happen to them and they turned it around and made it something great. And I knew some of those people, so I started interviewing them. And I kind of looked at people who basically reinvented themselves after something very negative, and what they had, what were the traits they had, what were the steps they took. And I looked at my own life and kind of came up with you know, if you want to reinvent your life at any time, you can, and these are kind of the things that people who've done it have done. So things like facing their fears and getting help and believing in themselves. And, so the book is really part self-help, part memoir, part thought leadership on reinvention. And that, it's a mindset really that you can be whatever you want to be and do whatever you want to do. And once you have that mindset, it's possible because it comes from within. So that's really, and it's a lot of stories. It's not a technical book. It's a very easy read. It feels like you're having a conversation.
Yeah. I very much commend people like yourself that start off someplace and end up somewhere completely different, because I think a lot of people who would have been in your position, despite the fact that you were let go in such an unceremonious way, the first inclination is, let me get my resume up, let me get it polished, let me get my LinkedIn profile polished up, and let me go find another job, because that's what I've been doing for however many years. But you took the chance and started something. And there's so many people out there that talk about starting something, who dream about it, but they never do it. But here you are, you're actually doing it. So kudos to you, Dr. Lori.
Thank you. Yeah, it took me a long time because I had thought about starting my own business years ago, but I finally did it, and it was probably the best thing I ever did.
Yeah. When it comes to speaking in front of people, do you ever get nervous? And if so, how do you deal with your nerves?
I do get nervous, and and it's funny because sometimes I get really nervous and sometimes I don't, and I'm not really sure the difference why. The one thing though I do that I found really helps is to kind of get my energy up and get myself in this place ready to speak. So like before I speak anywhere, I go, I kind of give myself a few minutes before I know I'm going to talk a bit, like I'll try to get my, do a yes, 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 and dance, put on some music I like and dance around. And then I always do like the big take up space, big stretch, and just kind of get myself ready. And that really seems to help with the nerves because you're kind of like, you've got your energy up, you're ready to go, you've done the big, make yourself big, make yourself happy. And then it helps a lot. But I still get nerves sometimes, when I get up, especially on a stage, sometimes I still feel nerves. And that's when I think what's really important is to really breathe and focus on breathing. So, if you're about to give a talk, take a deep breath before you get started. And then, as you're in, continue to focus on your breathing a little bit. Because sometimes we talk and we don't even, we forget to breathe and we go through and we realize we're nervous and we're kind of out of breath. So, getting your energy up and just getting yourself happy place beforehand, and then focus on breathing when you're giving the talk and pausing to take those breaths. And then you can calm yourself.
Yeah, breathing is so important. And I think a lot of us, we don't think about it in the time until we have these shallow breaths and feel we're about to pass out. And then we realize, this whole breathing thing, I think I should take a couple breaths and
Yeah.
figure myself out here. I don't want paramedics having to come get me off the stage for sure. Okay, so for the people who are listening or watching our conversation, Dr. Lori, and they think getting better in front of speaking as a technical person is something that I should do, what would be the one main reason you would tell them to go for it?
Because I think it's really, speaking is really important. I mean, when you get in front of people, you get authority, you get opportunity, you get visibility, and all of those help you in your career. I mean, the reason why I ended up being able to get the job into sales was I ended up giving a presentation in front of our safety meeting. And doing that, it was in front of the CEO, and then the CEO helped me move into sales for that company. So by speaking, you'll get in front of people, and it could be that right person. So that's one thing. You'll also it helps your confidence, and when you're confident in yourself, you're willing to take those risks and make those moves. And it does build your authority. Once you get known as an expert in something or what you're talking about, then it gives you a lot more opportunities.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. For the last quite some time now, at least for the last year or so, many people in the tech industry who thought that their jobs were solid got laid off. I know I have a connection from Intel, and he said, 10,000, thousands of people got laid off from Intel. And these are people who thought their, developer jobs, engineer jobs, probably thought they were golden. Now they're out here on the street. So hopefully when they were still working, thought of the importance of being able to communicate with others, the importance of being able to show your value and communicate your value to other people, because now you're going to have to do it to get that next job. They're not going to be as brave as you and start their own businesses. They're going to look for another job, and you're going to have to convince somebody else to hire them out from such a situation. So it definitely is important to develop those skills for sure.
Yes. Yeah, it helps in interviewing, it helps in talking to people, and really people know you more. So when you do, if you do need that job, I mean, you have connections because people have heard you speak. And if someone's heard you speak, they might be willing to recommend you for another job or introduce you to people. So
100%. This has been a great conversation, Dr. Lori. Thank you so much for being a guest. How can people get in touch with you?
yeah, probably the easiest way to get in touch with me, if you go to the site, it's https yourextraordinarylife.net. That has all my contact info. So that has my LinkedIn, my email, my phone. There's also, I actually have some free gifts on there. I have one gift that you might want to look at, especially if you're stuck if stuck anywhere or not comfortable speaking. It's called From Stuck to Soaring, 5 Mindset Hacks. And it talks about things like breathing and meditation, things that can kind of get you in that place where you'll become more comfortable with doing, giving that talk or making that job interview. So yeah, yourextraordinarylife.net. And that's got all the contact info for me.
Wonderful. Well, everyone, that marks the end of another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I'm the founder of Teach the Geek. I work with technical professionals so they can present more effectively, especially in front of non-technical audiences. And you can learn more about that at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Until next time, take care and stay safe. Thanks, Dr. Lori.
Thank you, Neil.